Japanese naval intelligence officers stare at puzzling battle reports flooding in from the Solomon Islands. Sailors from multiple ships at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal swear they've witnessed the same incredible phenomenon. An enigmatic American light cruiser unleashing a continuous wall of fire, her muzzle flashes creating an almost solid line of light along her deck. Several of the Imperial Navy's prized warships lay in ruins on the ocean floor, victims of this mysterious fire-spitting beast. Estimates suggest the vessel blasted over 1,500 shells in less than an hour. The officers exchanged worried looks. This is impossible. No naval guns can be reloaded, aimed, and fired that quickly. The fastest rate ever achieved by their own crews is barely half that speed. The mere thought drained the color from their cheeks. The Americans must have developed a naval 6-inch machine gun, or perhaps something even more deadly. Laid down at the New York Naval Shipyard in December 1936, USS Helena emerged as the 9th and final member of the Brooklyn-class light cruisers. The 1930 London Naval Treaty had restricted cruisers' use of 8-inch guns and limited their displacement to 10,000 tons. But instead of viewing this as a problem, American ship designers saw it as an opportunity. A lower weight could make for a faster vessel, and instead of having 8 8-inch guns, they would build cruisers with 12 6-inch guns, which they believed could potentially be even more effective. However, across the Pacific, the Japanese were already working on their latest cruisers, the Mogami class, and rumor had it that they would feature not 12, but 15 6-inch guns. With tensions already rising between the two nations, the United States was determined not to be outgunned by its rival, and decided that the Brooklyn class would be adapted to match the Mogami's firepower. So when the 607-foot Helena was commissioned in September 1939, she boasted 15 6-inch guns spread across 5 triple turrets, 3 forward, 2 aft. This staggered superfiring layout gave her overlapping arcs of fire, meaning she could throw a storm of 130-pound armor-piercing shells 15 miles in almost any direction at a rate of 10 rounds a minute. Helena's gunners trained relentlessly, developing loading techniques that transformed her gun decks into a precision factory of destruction. Each turret crew would work with stopwatch efficiency, maintaining such a blistering rate of fire that enemy observers would later refuse to believe naval rifles could sustain such devastating firepower, eventually nicknaming her a machine gun cruiser, in the belief that she must have carried automatic weapons. Aside from her main armament, Helena also featured 8 5-inch dual-purpose guns and an anti-aircraft battery of 8.5-inch guns. Meanwhile, her 4 Parsons turbines churned out 100,000 horsepower, enough to push her at 32 knots, faster than most destroyers. After completing her shakedown cruise and training exercises, Helena was transferred to Pearl Harbor in October 1940. For over a year, her 888-man crew conducted gunnery drills and tactical exercises in Hawaiian waters. Little did they know, Helena's first great test was about to come. As the sun rose on December 7, 1941, Helena lay moored at Pearl Harbor's 1010 dock on Ford Island, with the mine layer Oglala secured along her starboard side. At 7:57 a.m., signalman First Class C.A. Flood spotted aircraft approaching over Ford Island at 4,000 feet. Having recently served in the Asiatic Station, Ford immediately recognized the silhouettes and alerted Ensign William W. Jones, the officer at the deck. Without delay, Jones turned on the general alarm and passed word over the ship's announcing system, quote, "Japanese planes bombing Ford Island. Man all battle stations. Break out service ammunition." Within 3 minutes of the first bomb landing on Ford Island, a Nakajima B-5N Kate torpedo bomber streaked low over the harbor. Helena, occupying the berth normally reserved for the battleship USS Pennsylvania, which was in dry dock for maintenance, had inadvertently become a prime target. The Kate unleashed a specially modified Type 91 torpedo, which passed directly under Oglala and slammed into Helena's starboard side at frame 75, nearly amidships, 18 feet below the waterline. The explosion was devastating. Water and oil erupted skyward as Helena's forward engine room and boiler room flooded instantly. Having come so soon after general quarters had been called, the blast caught many crew members still racing to their battle stations. Sections of the ship were plunged into complete darkness as electrical cables were severed, but Chief Water Tender Westbrook immediately sprang into action, wading through chest-deep water and oil in the flooded compartments to retrieve vital boiler parts. Multiple electrical fires erupted in the plotting room as damaged circuits sparked, but damage control teams quickly extinguished them. For the next hour and 20 minutes, Helena's gunners poured out approximately 375 rounds from the 5-inch guns, 3,000 rounds from the 1.1-inch guns, and 5,000 rounds from the 50-caliber machine guns. When magazine locks threatened to slow ammunition supply, the crew simply broke them open with hammers. Meanwhile, Oglala, her hull plates loosened by the concussion from the torpedo blast, began taking on water. 3 crew members swam across to the sinking ship to help handle her mooring lines, then swam back to Helena as the mine layer began to capsize. Helena immediately began sharing her ammunition reserves with other damaged ships. 25,000 rounds of 50-caliber ammunition went to the battleship California, along with belting machines and thousands of spare belting links. Her crew even provided ammunition to gun positions on nearby buildings in the Navy Yard, transforming Helena into an ammunition depot as well as a fighting ship. Helena's anti-aircraft fire was so intense that several Japanese bomber formations broke off their attacks rather than face her barrage. She was officially credited with shooting down 6 enemy aircraft, more than any other ship at Pearl Harbor except the battleships. The cost was heavy. 26 men lost their lives in the initial torpedo blast, with 5 more later succumbing to their wounds. Oglala was also lost, flooding and capsizing. But Helena had survived and proven that rapid, accurate gunfire could turn the tide, even in the face of a surprise attack. Two days after Pearl Harbor, Helena was moved to Dry Dock No. 2 for emergency repairs. Steel plates were welded over the massive torpedo hull, and on December 31st, she was refloated. But the Navy had bigger plans than simply patching her up. Arriving at Mare Island Naval Shipyard near San Francisco on January 13, 1942, Helena received the most advanced radar systems the U.S. Navy had ever deployed. SG Surface Search Radar, SC Air Search Radar, and revolutionary FC and FD fire control radar sets that could guide her guns without any visual point of aim. Helena was now a prototype for the future of naval warfare, a ship that could sink her enemies in complete darkness. By October 1942, Helena was back in the South Pacific as part of Task Force 64, escorting supply convoys to Marines fighting on Guadalcanal. The Japanese controlled the waters around the island at night, conducting the high-speed supply and reinforcement runs known as the Tokyo Express. On October 11th, American reconnaissance detected a Japanese force moving south. Rear Admiral Aritomo Goto's 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers, heading to bombard the U.S.-held airbase Henderson Field. Rear Admiral Norman Scott's task force moved to intercept. 4 cruisers, including Helena, and 5 destroyers, steaming in single file through the darkness. By dumb luck, Scott's course change put his ships in the classic crossing the T position, but his flagship, USS San Francisco, lacked Helena's advanced radar. At 11:25 p.m., Helena's radar operators picked up the approaching Japanese squadron at 27,700 yards, over 13 nautical miles. As the range closed, Helena's crew tracked every movement of the enemy force, while Scott's flagship remained blind to the approaching danger. By 11:45, the Japanese ships were only 5,000 yards away, close enough for Helena's lookouts to see their hulls through the darkness. Captain Gilbert Hoover requested permission to open fire using the standard procedure, quote, "Interrogatory Roger," meaning, "Are we clear to act?" Scott replied, "Roger," intending only to acknowledge the message. But Hoover interpreted this as permission to engage. At 11:46 p.m., Helena's 15 6-inch guns erupted in a blinding salvo, followed immediately by star shells from her 5-inch batteries. The Japanese were caught completely by surprise. Helena quickly shifted her fire between targets as the general battle erupted around them. Although Helena's searchlight platform was wiped out in the first few minutes of battle, this actually worked to her advantage. As William Jones observed, quote, "Whenever any ship turned on her searchlights, everybody shot at her." Since Helena's searchlight platform was wiped out in the first few minutes of battle, we weren't tempted to use them. Instead, Helena relied on her revolutionary fire control radar. While other ships needed star shells or searchlight to illuminate targets, making themselves perfect targets in return, Helena could engage the enemy with accuracy in complete darkness. No visual point of aim was needed to lay her guns. Helena's rapid-fire guns found the heavy cruiser Furitaka, which was soon ablaze and sinking. The gunners then targeted the destroyer Fubuki, sending her to the bottom as well, while they also played a key role in crippling Admiral Goto's flagship Aoba. The victory at Cape Esperance provided a crucial morale boost for the U.S. Navy after the disaster at Savo Island 2 months earlier. But more importantly, it proved an American technological innovation. Radar-directed attacks, combined with Helena's devastating rate of fire, could triumph over Japanese night-fighting expertise. 1 month later, on the night of November 12th, the Japanese launched an even more ambitious attempt to retake Henderson Field. Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe's bombardment force included 2 fast battleships, Hiei and Kirishima, loaded with special fragmentation shells designed to destroy the airfield and every aircraft on it. Standing in their way was Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan's hastily assembled task force. But Callahan made a crucial error. Despite having 5 ships equipped with the revolutionary SG radar, he chose USS San Francisco as his flagship, which lacked the advanced radar systems that could have given him a clear picture of the tactical situation. Meanwhile, he placed Helena in the rear of the formation. At 1:24 a.m. on November 13th, Helena's radar operators detected the approaching Japanese force at a range of 27,100 yards, over 13 nautical miles away. As the enemy ships closed the distance, Helena continued tracking their every movement, but San Francisco's older radar systems couldn't detect them at such long range. Callahan remained unaware that a Japanese fleet was bearing down on his formation. William Jones recalled, quote, "The Japanese came down in 3 columns, and we went between 2 of them. Once again, the fighting started at point-blank range, because no ship knew where the hell they were, except the Helena." In the confusing melee that followed, Helena initially engaged the destroyer Akatsuki, disabling her searchlight before the Japanese vessel exploded and sank under concentrated fire from multiple American ships. Helena then turned to engage the destroyer Amatsukaze, scoring several hits before being forced to check fire, and San Francisco passed between them. Next came the destroyers Asagumo, Murasame, and Samidare, with Helena hitting Murasame in a boiler room and setting Samidare on fire. As the 38-minute battle raged, Helena maneuvered among burning ships from both sides, her radar giving her a clear picture of the tactical situation, while other ships fired blindly into the smoke and darkness. She emerged from the carnage relatively unscathed, having taken only 5 hits that caused negligible damage and claimed the life of just 1 man. The U.S. Navy emerged victorious from the naval battle of Guadalcanal, but at a considerable cost. Both Admiral Callahan and Admiral Scott were lost, along with hundreds of sailors. 2 light cruisers and 4 destroyers were sunk or would sink shortly after. Helena's captain, Gilbert Hoover, found himself the senior surviving officer of the shattered American force. At 2:26 a.m., Hoover ordered the surviving ships to withdraw southeast. Helena, San Francisco, Juneau, and the destroyers Sterett and O'Bannon limped away from the battlefield. However, at 11 a.m., as the battered formation headed for safety, the Japanese submarine I-26 fired a spread of 3 torpedoes at San Francisco. They missed their intended target, but 1 torpedo veered off course and struck Juneau. The torpedo detonated Juneau's forward magazine. And William Jones, watching from Helena, described the horrific scene, quote, "I just happened to be standing outside getting some air. I was looking at her and saw her blow up. I didn't see the torpedo track, but she just went up like you see pictures of an atomic bomb explosion." The explosion was so violent that a 5-inch gun mount from Juneau sailed through the air and splashed into the water on the far side of Helena. Jones was blown against a bulkhead by the shockwave, though he was not injured. As the smoke cleared, lookouts on Helena's bridge scanned the water for survivors, but none were immediately visible. Faced with an agonizing decision: risk his remaining ships to carry out a more thorough search for survivors, or continue the withdrawal to safety, Hoover chose to press on. Helena signaled a passing B-17 bomber about the sinking, but the report was never delivered. Juneau's survivors were left floating in shark-infested waters. By the time rescue ships arrived 8 days later, only 10 men out of 697 remained alive. Upon reaching port, Admiral William Halsey relieved Hoover of command for his failure to ensure proper rescue operations, though Halsey later expressed regret over the decision, noting that Hoover had been exhausted and motivated by the need to preserve his ships. The damage to the captain's career was irreversible. Following the overall American victory at Guadalcanal in early 1943, Allied forces moved up the Solomon Chain. Helena took part in a series of preparatory bombardments against Japanese positions on New Georgia, her guns pounding enemy airfields and supply depots at Munda and Villa. On July 4th, now under the command of Captain Charles Cecil, Helena joined the task force, escorting the amphibious assault on Rice Anchorage in Kula Gulf. At 12:26 a.m. on July 5th, she unleashed her famous guns once more, hurling over 1,000 rounds at Japanese positions before the landing force went ashore successfully. But the afternoon brought ominous news. Japanese destroyers were racing south down the slot with 2,400 troops and supplies for the beleaguered garrison. Rear Admiral Walden Ainsworth's task force, Helena, her sisters St. Louis and Honolulu, and 4 destroyers turned north to intercept. At 1:06 a.m. on July 6th, Japanese destroyer Nizuki detected the approaching Americans on radar at 13 nautical miles. Rear Admiral Teruo Akiyama took his 3 screening destroyers to observe, while the other 7 continued unloading their cargo. At 1:57 a.m., the American vessels let rip their radar-directed rapid fire. Between the 3 cruisers, they poured out nearly 1,500 shells in just 5 minutes. Helena's guns blazed continuously, creating what observers described as, quote, liquid fire squirting from a hose. Helena quickly expanded her supply of flashless propellant charges from the previous night's bombardment, now firing standard smokeless powder. Each salvo created enormous muzzle flashes that lit up her entire length, making her a perfect target in the darkness. The Japanese destroyers Suzukaze and Tanikaze had taken minor hits but escaped serious damage under a smokescreen, but not before releasing 8 torpedoes. At 2:03 a.m., just as Ainsworth ordered his ships to turn right to engage a second group of Japanese destroyers, 3 of those long-lance torpedoes found their mark. The first torpedo struck Helena 150 feet from the bow, destroying her forward turret and tearing open the hull nearly to the keel. The blast was so violent that it may have detonated a magazine. But even with her bow nearly severed, Helena's remaining guns continued firing. 2 minutes later, the second and third torpedoes struck much lower in the hull, as much as 15 feet below the waterline, smashing into her machinery spaces. The impacts broke Helena's keel and flooded her engine rooms, leaving her without power. Captain Cecil gave the order to abandon ship 4 minutes after the first torpedo hit. As the crew went over the side, Helena's hull began to buckle and break apart amidships, the center section sinking quickly, while her bow and stern remained afloat temporarily. Hours later, as the other American ships regrouped in the darkness, a searchlight beam swept across the water and illuminated something protruding from the quiet sea, the bow section of a warship still afloat. Admiral Ainsworth ordered the destroyer Radford to investigate. For long minutes, Radford's searchlight probed the wreckage, while the Admiral's voice crackled impatiently over the radio, quote, "Who is it? Acknowledge." The tension was palpable on the bridges of the surviving ships as they waited in the dark. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Radford's somber reply came back, quote, "I'm sorry to report, it's 50. Helena's hull number, CL50, painted on her bow, confirmed what everyone feared, but hoped wasn't true. The machine gun cruiser was gone. Nearly 1,000 men were suddenly in the water, clinging to life rafts and debris as Helena's broken hull disappeared beneath the waves. Captain Cecil, who had survived the sinking, refused to be pulled aboard one of the rescue destroyers. Instead, he took command of 4 whaleboats that had been lowered from the destroyers Nicholas and Radford. The rescue operation was repeatedly interrupted by Japanese ships searching the area. At 3:41 a.m., the destroyers reached the survivors and began pulling men from the water, their crews hanging cargo nets over the sides. But at 4:15, radar contacts forced them to break off. Japanese destroyers were approaching at high speed. After a brief skirmish with the destroyer Amagiri, Nicholas and Radford resumed rescue operations, but dawn was approaching fast. Under strict orders to avoid being caught by Japanese aircraft, the destroyers were forced to withdraw, leaving behind 4 whaleboats manned by volunteers. In the course of the night's operations, Nicholas had rescued 291 survivors, while Radford picked up 444. But more than 275 men remained in the water or scattered across the area. Captain Cecil supervised the loading of 3 usable whaleboats, each towing a life raft, and directed their course away from Japanese-occupied Kolombangara. After sailing through the day, the boats reached a beach near American lines on New Georgia. The following morning, the destroyers Gwyn and Woodworth arrived to pick up these 88 survivors. Yet a significant number of Helena's crew were still unaccounted for. Some had climbed onto the ship's floating bow section, while others drifted on life rafts in the treacherous currents between the islands. A B-24 Liberator spotted groups of men in the water and dropped additional life rafts. The one sank immediately. The survivors faced brutal conditions: scorching sun by day, freezing temperatures at night, sharks, and no food or fresh water. As the hours passed, many grew weaker, and some didn't survive the ordeal. By July 8th, ocean currents had carried several groups of survivors to the shorelines of Vella La Vella, an island occupied by the Japanese, where discovery meant certain capture or execution. Yet the men had unlikely allies. Solomon Islanders living on Vella La Vella had been watching the naval battle from their villages and spotted the exhausted Americans struggling onto the beaches. Working with a Coast Watcher detachment hidden in the island's interior, the local population began gathering the scattered survivors before Japanese patrols could find them. In small groups, they guided the Americans through dense jungle paths to secret camps far from enemy positions. 104 survivors were taken to the house of a Chinese merchant deep in the island's interior, while 2 other groups of 50 and 11 men were hidden at different locations. For over a week, the Solomon Islanders risked their lives to keep the Americans fed, hidden, and safe from Japanese search parties. The Coast Watchers immediately radioed Guadalcanal with news of the survivors' location. Admiral Richmond Turner's staff began planning an unprecedented rescue operation, but evacuating 165 men from an enemy-occupied island would require destroyers, not the submarines or PT boats typically used for such missions. The plan was audacious. 8 destroyers would escort 2 destroyer transports to Vella La Vella under cover of darkness. 4 destroyers would take up defensive positions to block Japanese interference, while the transports used small boats to ferry the survivors to safety. On the night of July 15th, the rescue fleet arrived off Vella La Vella. Helena's survivors flashed recognition signals from the beach. Higgins boats raced through the surf to collect the men, along with several Chinese merchants and their families who had helped hide them. The operation was flawless. All 165 Helena survivors were evacuated without loss, along with the downed American pilot and even a captured Japanese pilot. The flotilla arrived back in Tulagi that afternoon, where the rescued men were reunited with the crewmates who'd been pulled from the water the night of the sinking. USS Helena received the Navy Unit Commendation for her actions at Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, and Kula Gulf, recognition of her exceptional service throughout the Solomon Islands campaign. Yet for 75 years, Helena's final resting place remained unknown. Then, on April 11, 2018, billionaire philanthropist Paul Allen's research vessel, RV Petrel, located the wreck during an expedition to find ships lost in the Solomon Islands campaign. The ship lay in 2 sections at a depth of 2,820 feet, her hull, number 50, still clearly visible on the stern. Allen's team confirmed her identity through the distinctive features that had made her so deadly: the 5 triple turrets that had earned her the nickname Machine Gun Cruiser. Indeed, Helena's service record remained unmatched: 10,639 rounds fired in combat, more than any ship in U.S. Navy history. A memorial now stands in Helena, Montana, commemorating both cruisers to bear the city's name. Along with the names of the lost crew members, it bears the inscription, quote, "They are still Helena men. Always will be."